My boyfriend slept with his sister and I don't know what to do.
My boyfriend told me last night that he'd fucked his sister last year and now he wants me to stay and figure this out. For context, my boyfriend and I have been dating for little over 9 months, and last night we were having a conversation about when we were at our lowest. I told him about my suicide attempt and he just sat quietly and listened to me whilst holding my hand because I don't like to be touched heavily when I'm sad. One of the reasons why I love him beyond words. He then told me that last year, around October, he was in a really bad place and feeling close to the edge when he said his sister came home from work and they got to talking. Which turned into drinking. Which turned into, you guessed it, coitus. To be fair, they are step-siblings, but they've been raised as a familial unit for over 10 years now, and being who I am and how I was raised, there's no such thing as step. Even the idea of cousins was not taught to us for a long time because people under one roof are family. I asked him how inebriated he was, because I was worried about the consent aspect of it all. And he said he was sober enough to know what they were doing was wrong, but just drunk enough to get him over the line. I asked if she was drunk and he said not more than usual. This is where it gets weird. If this wasn't already weird enough. He said that she'd come home upset from work, and while he was comforting her, she sat in his lap for a cuddle, as you do when you're upset, but only to your partner. He said he was weirded out, but just thought that maybe that's how she expressed affection. He then said she put her face into the crook of his neck to cover her face with his hair. He has godly hair, and then she started kissing his neck like this was some shit in a romance film. He immediately backed up so that her face was visible and she'd stop kissing his neck, and then they just stared at each other. He refused to tell me what happened next. I asked who initiated the act and he was adamant he wouldn't tell me. Fine. I don't press that part of the story. Next thing he remembers them being on the couch and they're making out, etc. She's straddling him and then he's lying on top of her and then they're having sex. Clothes on. Just the opening of zippers and the lifting of hems. As he feels himself about to come, he tries to pull out and she wraps her legs around his waist. Okay. My guy is a pretty big dude, so he could have easily launched himself off of her, so I asked him why he didn't, and he told me that it all happened so quickly and in the heat of the moment. He just couldn't find it in him to really try. So then he comes inside of her. He says things happened pretty quickly after that. He sits up and he said she lay there, her dress covering her nethers, and she has a weird smile on her face. I told him he's lying, which I shouldn't, because he's being vulnerable with me to protect my feelings and make himself look less worse in the situation, and he swears that he isn't. I don't know if it was my reaction, which wasn't violent or anything, or him recalling the incident, but he looked genuinely terrified. This knocked the wind out of me because I'd never seen him like that and needed to make sure he was okay, irregardless of what I'd just heard. And the conversation ends. He asks me to say something. Anything, and I respond, I don't know what you want me to say. And then I laugh because this is surely the script of a porno gone wrong. Look, I've watched enough porn to understand the allure of making something I watch on my phone screen into a reality, but we're adults who live in the real world and our sex life is healthy enough that we try literally thing, but we know that fantasies are just that. Anyways, I start to his leave house and he's crying, which was gut-wrenching because he's not the crier in our dynamic. And he's apologizing profusely, saying that it was a mistake and it wouldn't happen again, blah blah blah, but I told him be that as it may. She's still his sister who we've Sunday dinners with, and we've all sat on that very same fucking couch, no pun intended. Uck. Anyway, we haven't spoken since yesterday because I told him I spaced to think, but I honestly don't know what to. And don't think I didn't do a pros/cons list. It happened last year. Step is the operative word. He'd truly reached rock bottom, but ceases drist. I just can't understand it. It feels like my brain short circuits every time I try to think about it. Finally, I love him more than anything in the world. He brought me back to life. Man. I don't want to let that go, but my mantra in really bad situations is sometimes love just isn't enough. I'm calling to Abyss and ask that it gives me wisdom. He's not on SM, so I don't think he'll see it, and I wouldn't dare ask anyone who could infer for advice. Please help me. TLDR. My boyfriend confided in me that he'd had sex with his stepsister in a low moment. He wants us to stay together and work this out, but I'm torn and need advice. Edit. My cousin put on Scarface to comfort me because she wants to see what all the hullabaloo is about. She doesn't know. We're at the end, but throughout she kept on commenting about how weird Tony is with his sister. I think this might actually be dream/nightmare and the biggest sign I've ever seen in my life. I'm going to have to get a rival drug gang to finish this because I don't think I have the strength. My 26F fiancé 28M slept with my sister 32F. Heartbroken and devastated. I can't move on. Hi Reddit. I'm posting here in the hope that someone can give me some advice. Share their experiences. I don't know. I'm just completely at a loss. I feel like my heart has been ripped out. My fiancé, let's call him Jake, and I have been together for 7 years. I don't know a life without him. I met him at university. We stayed together past graduation. And moved into a flat which we bought together 2 years ago. He proposed last summer and we were set to wed in July 2017. We have had very few problems until now. My sister, let's call her Sarah, is an extremely volatile person. Growing up, I doted on her completely, but she had a lot of personal issues that made our home life turbulent. Her childhood was very different to mine. My parents had very little money. They were on the brink of a divorce. My dad was physically violent on a number of occasions. Whilst things improved drastically in the years after I was born, she has an abundance of problems that stem back to this. My parents feel a lot of guilt about Sarah's upbringing, and used to let her get away with some shocking behavior. Sarah had the same boyfriend for as long as I can remember. They dated from when they were 16. And their relationship was toxic. They habitually broke up and got back together. When they were good, they were crazy in love. But more often than not, she would have these insane arguments, sometimes physical, with him, then take out her frustrations and despair on myself and my parents. I remember spending many nights lying by her side in bed while she cried so hard she would retch. After their arguments, she would throw plates and glasses at the wall. Hit herself. Sometimes she would hit me and my parents too. It was like he was a drug to her. And she was emotionally stunted and didn't know how to see anything past their relationship. 2 months ago, her boyfriend called things off for good. I don't know what gave. But after nearly 2 decades together, he finally had enough. He booked a one-way ticket to another country, changed his number, deleted all social media profiles, and essentially disappeared from Sarah's life. To this day, she still won't explain what caused this. But it was long overdue. To say Sarah was devastated is an understatement. She moved out of their shared rented apartment and in with my parents. I would visit her most days after work, where she would flit in between explosive rage to an almost catatonic silence, staring at the wall with tears streaming down her face. At one point, we were all extremely worried she might seriously harm herself and organized for her to see a therapist, something I had suggested for years. Of course, she backed out days before her appointment, and there were no consequences. She is, after all, a grown woman. She just hasn't changed emotionally in the entire time I've known her, and still acts like a teenager. 2 days ago, I went to visit Sarah, who was in bed in her darkened room. I let myself in and attempted to speak to her, telling her about my day at work. She immediately exploded, screaming at me, throwing her pillows across the room, crying uncontrollably. She told me life was unfair, that I had everything and she was left alone to rot, that everything wrong in her life was because she was a bad person. She hurt her boyfriend. She drove him away. She's ruined our family. She fucked Jake and didn't even feel guilty at the time. I initially thought I'd misheard her, but then she said it again. It was like she had poured a bucket of ice water over me. I silently left, shaking. When I got home, Jake was there watching TV. It came out of my mouth the second I saw him, and I could see in his eyes it was true. He broke down and told me it had happened 3 years ago. Sarah had had another blazing row with her boyfriend and decided to drive round to Jake's looking for me. I was at our parents' at the time and Jake attempted to pacify Sarah. He comforted her while she sobbed in his arms. And one thing led to another. They had sex. I packed an overnight bag while he followed me from room to room, sobbing and telling me it was the worst mistake of his life. That he still has no idea how it happened. That he felt unbelievably guilty the second it was over. That it feels like it wasn't even real. I left him in the doorway begging me not to leave. I've checked into a hotel and have switched my phone off. I don't know what to do. Who to tell? Where to begin? I feel sick. Like this is a bad dream. My heart feels like it's been ripped into a million pieces. For all of Sarah's faults, I love her more than anything. It's the two people who are more to me than anyone else in the world. How the fuck do I move on from this? I feel like I'm in a bubble. I don't know what's going on in the outside world. All I do is cry and sleep in this room. Someone please help me make sense of this. TL. Doctor. My volatile sister recently went through a breakup after a 16-year relationship with the love of her life. She is severely depressed and almost catatonic. I went to visit her one day only for her to explode and tell me she slept with my fiancé 3 years ago. He admitted it was true and I haven't spoken to a soul since. I have locked myself in a hotel room with no plans of ever coming out. My heart is shattered into a million pieces and I don't know what to do.